recording. You guys can work together on those, but you'll be actually looking at two different shells, obviously, since we haven't
Yes.
merged these classes. So I'm trying to keep them identical. So if I add things to one, I make sure they go into the second one at the same time. So what I have done already this week is upload some resources into your shell and to Michaela's. So it should be, you should be able to see everything I talk about.
Perfect. Thank you.
We'll be using probably the morning shell for most of our work when I put something up on the screen. So while it should look exactly alike, if it doesn't exactly match up, that's not a big deal.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
So you haven't done the discussions from last week.
Yes. I need to get those completed.
Yes, please do. Because then we can be moving on. You got two more this week. So, yeah, I just wanted to go back and look at the in-class activity from last week.
Oh, yes.
Um,
I got your feedback on that.
oh, you did? Good. So,
yes. But we can definitely take a look at it.
Right. So let's put up. Yeah, so here you should be able to see the answer sheet. So when converting kilos to pounds, we multiply by 2.2. So this one should be 143 pounds. Number 2, 65 kilos should equal 143 pounds.
Okay. So we multiply.
Yeah,
okay.
Right. One thing that maybe we'll do is pull up some of my discussion from last week where I give a rubric, and I probably will also put a conversion rubric, if I can find where I've stored it on my computer, into the course resources. Okay, and the other one was question 10.
Question 10.
Yeah. So, right. So we're dividing the number of milliliters by 5 milliliters per teaspoon to calculate teaspoonfuls.
That was definitely an error. I should have caught that one.
Yeah.
I didn't cross multiply very well.
Right. And that's pretty good. One of the things that I want you to be doing a lot of these calculations, I want you to make the mistakes here in my class. Because what I want you to do is get a feel when you look at a problem for what the right answer should be. Maybe not exact in terms of numbers, but what's the ballpark? When something, my rule of thumb is if you look at something and it doesn't look right, there's a good chance it isn't, because part of your brain is doing this calculation for you and helping you realize that you're in the right ballpark. So if you look at something like this one and you get less than a teaspoonful when you do your calculation,
That
and
should be wrong.
Yeah, then you're going to look at it and say, what did I do wrong here? And the same with the weight. The number of pounds, when you're converting kilos to pounds, the number of pounds is always higher than the number you start with. So what you want to do is have this feeling and look at something and say, no, that can't be right.
Okay.
And I'd rather you say, no, that can't be right, um, when it is right, because then you go back and check it. I'd rather you make that mistake rather than saying, oh, that's okay, and making
Okay.
an error. So that's really part of the reason we do a lot of these things, is to give you a feel for what should be approximately right.
Okay.
Okay. It doesn't, so that's my rule of thumb. I call it the sniff test. If it doesn't smell right, it's probably not right. So, so we'll be doing more calculations,
Okay.
and more, in a way, more complicated calculations today. Complicated in that there will be more components to it, not that
Okay.
the calculations will themselves be difficult. Although when we get to calculating body surface area using a formula, we'll go through how to solve that on a calculator, because you're going to take a square root at the end of
Oh, okay.
it. Okay. So we want to get a to go through that carefully. I have run through the assessment for this week, and every answer in the assessment is correct. So
Okay.
that was the first time I taught this class. We had probably 1 in 10 answers were incorrect in the key, because people were putting things together in too much of a hurry. And there's where you run into mistakes. When you get into a hurry,
Exactly.
that's when you make errors. So um, sometimes you have to be in a hurry. If you've got a patient who's bleeding to death, you have to do something right now. But if all you're doing is calculating a medication that a patient needs, then take the few extra seconds. As I said, and as I say in my, as I said, I think to you, maybe to Kayla, um, I do a lot of calculations in my head, and I'm pretty good at that. But if I get into a hurry, I make mistakes. So that's why I tell my students, anytime you see me doing a calculation in my head, check it,
Okay.
because I'm wrong enough of the times that that you should be checking it. Also, get used to checking calculations, and especially when you're working with other people, we have you have a lot of calculations to check, and we work together, which is why I'm glad that you are joining this class, so that we can so that I can have you and Kayla working together on the in-class activity and helping each other.
Yes, thank you for letting me come and Zoom during this session.
Not a
think
problem.
I think that'll also help, because sometimes I do get in my own head, like, is that even right? And I sit there and triple check, sometimes even more.
Mm-hmm.
The word portion, the word problems on the assessment for last week kind of threw me for a loop, but it was fun to put yourself in that situation where you are double checking somebody's work.
Yes, yes. And you should never be afraid to ask someone to look at your calculations. And you'll run into people who may not want to take that time, but for patient safety, it's a good idea to have people check things for you, especially if it's um, not a straightforward calculation. But even then, you want to think very seriously about having someone look it over. I do know that that it's not uncommon in medical situations, and especially nurses will do this. In a hospital, pharmacy will send up a prescription and tell the nursing staff exactly what the dose is and how to deliver it, and they'll check it, which is good, because you know the issue is mistakes are made. This is how mistakes, especially on prescriptions, get caught by most of the time. Probably 85% of the time, mistakes get caught simply by somebody looking at it and checking it and examining it. So it's a good idea to get used to that.
Okay. I have, well, I wasn't in this situation, but I worked for a company that was in the situation of the pharmacist filled out a wrong dosage for a prescription for a child, and it didn't immediate, and the child did not die because of the miscalculation. There were other reasons, but that pharmacist was questioned, you know, and she stated she obviously lost her license, but she stated that she did all her own calculations. Nobody checked hers.
Yeah.
And I sometimes feel like when somebody like a doctor or a pharmacist, you know, they don't technically want to get questioned for their calculations, but I don't know how certain ones feel about that. Is there any, if I do go into an MA position, like, is, you can always question a doctor, correct? If you're confused or feel that the calculation is wrong?
Yes, though sometimes they get a little prickly, and probably the best way to do it is, can you help me understand how you calculated this? I want to
Okay.
and then if they find out they've done it wrong, you know, they're not going to be unhappy with you about questioning them. So,
Okay.
you know, it's all about how you approach things. Some people get really unhappy when you question what they've done. If you question them directly, so you can always sort of finesse the issue by asking them to help you learn how they did the whatever the calculation or whatever it was, unless it's clear that, you know, they're prescribing a drug to be taken, say, orally, that's supposed to be injected.
Okay.
Okay. And that's usually an oversight on their part, because they know these things too. But it's a good thing to get used to the idea that as opposed to what we think doctors are taught in medical school, they're not infallible.
Okay.
So I guess we better go ahead and get started. I don't know when Kayla's going to join us. Let me just send her a quick email.
No problem. See if I can pull that.
Okay. There we go. All right, so let's go on and go back to the class. Okay, so last week your work was really good, Ariel. I was really pleased to see that you got 100% on the assessment after I went through and I graded, obviously, since you had to write out some of your answers. but you had everything correct. So that was really good. And it lets me know that you, first off, knew the material, and probably it helped that you'd had some of this before from TEL. But you know, we just need to review many of these things. But today we're going to go into this week we're dealing with different ways of calculating doses. And the issue with dosing is that is really an outgrowth of the way we develop drugs. We develop drugs for adults primarily, unless they're very specifically drugs that can only be used in children. A company I worked for one time we developed a drug for treating premature babies, getting their lungs to inflate. So obviously we're not going to give that to an adult. So it's much more complex when you are developing drugs in children, and especially babies, because the babies especially metabolize and deal with drugs differently than adults do. Part of that is because their systems aren't fully engaged yet. They're still developing. And part of that is because their systems haven't been challenged by life. You know, their livers haven't been beaten up by the toxins that we ingest. Their kidneys haven't been assaulted by all the things that go through them, et cetera. So they do deal with drugs differently. And so what we have to do is we have to dose them very, very differently. So in the clinical trial structure, we start off usually taking patients between the ages of about 18 to 50 or 55. Because once you get above 55 or so, also age-related factors change the way the body deals with drugs. So we have to be careful in our older population as well.
Okay.
And largely because the older population, again, their systems have been in use for half a century or more, and have been assaulted by environmental and lifestyle factors, drinking, smoking, plus the environmental issues that we face. All of these things affect the ability of the body to handle drugs. So as we get older, it's different as well. So that's why we now are seeing a real interest in the differential handling of drugs by geriatric populations. And we're seeing geriatric specialists who actually look at these things very carefully, as do pharmacists, because they're the ones who actually understand drugs better than doctors, because that's all they study, that's all they deal with. But children are, they are small people. And when we develop a drug, most of the time, we develop a drug that we give what we call an average adult dose to people. So that average adult dose, you can see when you're looking at the labeling, if it says the dose of a drug is 20 milligrams, that means that is what was determined in clinical trials to be both safe and effective, and a low effective dose as opposed to a high effective dose. And it's the whole process of drug development is complicated when it comes to how we choose both the dose and the frequency at which we are giving the drug. So all of this is determined in clinical trials in adults first. If we're going to move down to younger or older populations, then we do special studies to determine just how they work. Okay. So we are looking at this week, looking at the difference between adult and pediatric dosages. And there are several ways we can do that. So ideally, any drug should, the dose should be tailored to the individual. Ideally, you would adjust the dose based on the individual's size and age. Size, we'll get into how we look at size and how we do those adjustments for kids as well. But we have to, ideally, we would do that. I mean, just think about this. You got two guys who walk into a doctor's office. One of them is a linebacker and the other is a jockey. They have the same disease. We give them the same dose as adults. And that's not rational.
Mm-mm.
But we do that because we have calculated what the average dose is that's effective. And our drugs are developed such that that dose is sufficiently well below the dose at which you start getting toxicities that this works in the majority of cases.
Oh, wow.
And it works real well because what we do is we when we're developing a drug, we calculate, we look at what is a dose that will give on average sufficient quantity of drug to be effective in treating whatever the condition is. And we look at then in various studies based on animals, as well as looking for safe doses in humans, we look at where we start getting into problems of toxicity with the drug. And most of these toxicities are measured by looking at changes in liver function tests and kidney function that are generally recoverable. They're not long-term harmful. So what we want is a drug where this beginning toxicity is way, way above the effective dose, so that we can get away with this, even though it doesn't make logical sense to give those two guys the same dose of the same drug. But it works.
Okay.
But it doesn't work when we're talking about children and especially babies. So we have to have ways of reducing those doses. And I'm going to bring up this week's where is it? This week's assignment. It's here someplace. All right. All right. So this week's assignment is going to have this the title of calculation skill building. That's what we're going to be doing the rest of the mod. So we know the basic formula. We went through that last week. The dose ordered divided by the dose on hand times this strange Q quantity, this dosage form,
Okay.
the form that it's delivered. So in this particular, we have an example here. And I want to go through some examples of injectable drugs because this assumes an oral drug. But injectable drugs, we have to calculate a volume. You did that when you took Pharmacy 107, the injections class.
Yes.
And you've done some of the calculations in Pharmacy 208. So what we have here in this first question is an order for 12.5 milligrams of this drug, promethazine, to be injected in the office. Okay. So what we're looking at is 12.5 milligrams. We have 0.05 grams per milliliter. So this is the dose ordered, 12.5 milligrams. This is the dose on hand, 0.05 grams. And Q is 1 milliliter. We know it's 1 milliliter because there's nothing in front of it. There's no coefficient, no number in front of it. If this had been 5, then it would be 5 milliliters. That would be Q. But the thing is, we have milligrams and grams. And one of the biggest mistakes that we can make is to forget that we have to convert to the same unit. Okay? I usually suggest when you convert units to convert to the smaller unit. You may get some big numbers, but you don't care, right? Because they're just numbers, right? But there's a very practical reason I do that. And it's because when you convert to a smaller unit, you are multiplying by the conversion factor.
Okay.
If you go the other way, you're dividing. And even though these are fairly simple calculations, most of us can multiply easier than we can divide, including me. So, you know, I just recommend, I don't care. What I suggest strongly, though, is that whatever method you decide to use it every single time you do a conversion.
Okay.
Because if you mix and match, you're going to get an error.
Yep.
Okay, it will happen because I've watched it and I've done it. So I've learned the hard way to do things very consistently.
Okay.
It may be boring. Some people think it's boring, but it's a lot less boring than it is distressing to actually harm a patient.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yes.
So you have to convert this to milligrams.
Okay.
And remember the conversion factor is 1,000. So now we convert this to 50 milligrams and simply plug it into the formula and calculate a number of milliliters. Okay. So that's fairly straightforward there. That's one way of doing it, and it works. However, this assumes it's an adult dose. We haven't been told who this patient is.
Right.
But we're going to assume that we're talking about dosing adults. When we are looking at reducing an adult for our dose for a pediatric formula, and pediatric in the case of medicine has a couple of definitions. Pediatric is anything less than an adult. Really, literally, because we talk about these pediatric formulas that we use, but we're basically talking about someone who's not at full adult weight. There are lots of different opinions about what is full adult. And of course, we can look at people and think, okay, you're an adult, and it turns out wrong. I remember one time I was talking to a young man, and he was talking about playing basketball, and then he said, well, I said he'd like to play basketball when he gets older, and I looked at him and I said, how old are you? And he said, well, I'm 13. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm looking up at him.
Oh.
He is at least a head and a half taller than I am.
Oh my goodness.
At 13. So, you know, in that case, you'd look at him and say, well, he's adult size. So you have a judgment to make, but it's pretty obvious for most kids that they're smaller. And so there are several different ways we use and several different rules that have been developed for calculating these doses and reducing these doses. One of them is called Clark's rule, and this is an example of Clark's rule. The child's weight divided by in pounds divided by 150 pounds times the average adult dose. Now, why 150? Well, for some reason, when Clark was putting this, these are all named on the people that invented the rules, by the way.
Okay.
Doctors love to put their name on things. So do a lot of other people, by the way. But this is Clark's rule for pediatric formula. So 150 pounds is a putative average adult weight.
Okay.
So we simply divide the weight in pounds by 150 pounds and multiply by the normal adult dose or average adult dose. You will always be told what the average adult dose is. Now, if you don't have that because you're working in an office, you'll look it up. Everything's available online, plus you'll have the physician's desk reference there in the office, or have access to it online through your office subscription. But you'll be able to look it up, and it's right there. The other place, have you guys put Hippocrates on your phones?
I did not.
Okay, there's something called Hippocrates, Epocrates, and it is it's a medical database that has that has information about adult and pediatric doses for drugs. It is the basic Hippocrates is available for download for free, and you can put it onto your smartphone. I think you can also put it onto your computer, but it gives you access to the most recent data on all the drugs that are available. There's other information in there as well. Some of that information has to be accessed via subscription. But for the purposes of these classes, the free subscription will work. You can always, upgrade to a paid subscription when you're working. But it's useful. So you have lots of different places you can find this average adult dose. So we want, in this particular case, the example is we're ordering Rocephin. It's an intramuscular injection. This statement here is absolutely correct. You're not going to give capsules to this patient. What you're going to get, an IM injection. Obviously, you're not going to dump stuff out of a capsule and inject it. That's not ever going to work. But this is something that needs to be changed in the assignment, and it hasn't happened yet, even though I have requested that change. So, but the normal adult dose is 500 milligrams. So forget this. It should be how many milligrams would you give to your patient? Okay. And we'll see this several times. So in this example, so we have a 50-pound patient. We're told that. If you're given the weight in kilograms, convert it to pounds by multiplying by 2.2. Then divide 50 by 150 times 500. We're not going to give this exact weight to a patient. So it can be rounded off to, instead of 166.67, can round it off to 167 milligrams. There is a bit of thought here that we need to put into it. When we are doing a calculation like this, we will round it off. As long as the ultimate dose we give to our patient is within 10% of what we calculate. And of course, the difference between 166.67 and 167 is far, far less than 10%.
Yes.
As long as we can do that, and the FDA even has counseled that this is a perfectly good calculation, because there are times when we're going to be close on that. Most of the time, we will make every effort we can be to be within 1% or 2% of the proper dose.
Okay.
Compounding pharmacies hate the 10% rule because they would prefer to be much more precise in their compounding. But it is sometimes necessary to consider that. So we do this this calculation, and so this is the answer. Since we're not being told anything about the concentration of the drug, again, this is just really not supposed to be there. We're not told anything about, we can't calculate a number of milligrams. Michaela, you're on. Great. Welcome to class, Kayla. Okay, she's connecting to audio. Okay.
Hello.
Hi there.
Sorry, I keep forgetting I have school on Monday and not Tuesdays anymore.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you can join us. You can pick up what, the beginning of this recording after class, okay?
Okay.
Kayla, we've had, we're being joined by Ariel. Ariel was scheduled for my evening class, but the morning is working out better for her. And quite frankly, I like having at least 2 people in the class as well, because as I told Ariel at the beginning of class, when we do an in-class exercise, I like my students to work together to solve the problems and help each other learn. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right. So what we're talking about, just to do a quick recap, is this week we're going to be looking at calculations of dosing, and what we're going to be looking at in a lot of detail is how we calculate reduced doses for children and babies, because we can't give these patients a normal adult dose, which is how all drugs are developed in the pharmaceutical industry. So we're going through a reduction formula, and this, again, this is out of the week 2 assignment download. There are a couple of things I will be going through this and pointing out some places where there's some misleading information. So what we do with there are several formulas that we can use for calculating pediatric doses. And as I told Ariel, pediatric in the context of this particular topic means anything less than an adult. And sometimes you have to look at someone and say, okay, you're adult size. So first one we're talking about is this one, Clark's rule. And it is basically to divide the child's weight in pounds by 150 pounds, and then multiply that by the adult dose. The adult dose will be given when you have a problem, but if you're working in an office, you can always find it through the physician's desk reference, or, as I was just talking to Ariel, a downloadable free app called ePocrates that you can put on your smartphone that has a drug database that has all this information in it. So we can get that information very, very quickly if it's in a real world situation where you don't see the information. So in this particular case, we have a 50-pound child, 6 years old, and the normal adult dose of this drug, the drug itself is irrelevant, but I will point out that it's to be given by injection, intramuscular injection. And so this statement about capsules is wrong. It should be how many milligrams would you give your patients? this is locked, so I can't edit it and change it. So just remember that if you see a statement like this and it's an injectable drug, it's a mistake. That should be how many milligrams. And that's all we're calculating. So we have a 50-pound child divided by 150 and then multiply that by 500. We get this number, 166.67. We always round it off. There are one or two cases where we will not round off, and we'll get to those. So in this case, this patient would receive 167 milligrams. So we're going to keep on going down. I'm just going to go through the various rules. Another one is called Young's rule, and this is age-based. The previous Clark's rule was based on weight. Young's rule is age-based. So we have the child's age in years, and we divide that by the child's age in years plus 12 years and multiply that by the adult dose. So we've added 12. Why do we add 12? Well, that's the logic is that at 12 they start getting into closing in on their adult size, but it's not we're not going to worry about that too much here. So we're going back to our same 6-year-old patient that was 50 pounds in the previous problem we looked at. And so we have the age in years, which is 6, and then 18 is 6 plus 12. So we have 6 over 18 times 500, and we calculate the same exact dose. So these things are close enough to each other that they generally work. It's not 100% necessarily, because we do have smaller and larger 6-year-olds. So, and again, when you see this here, it's an injectable drug, you see how many capsules, it should be milligrams. Okay. So, and down here we have, again, what is the dose ordered? That means how many milligrams. So this particular problem, we've got another drug to be given IM. Pediatric patient is 4, so that becomes the child's age. We add that up, multiply it, and get an answer. The third rule that we have for looking at pediatric formulas is really truly pediatric patients. These are for patients that are basically a year-ish or less. They could be 13, 14 months if they're small.
Okay.
Or if they're, if they're having other problems that mean that they're not growing well. So this is called Freed's rule, and we look at the child's age in months. And we divide that by 150 months. Well, why 150 months? Well, 150 months is 12 and a half years.
Okay.
So again, we're looking, if we go back to Young's rule, we added 12 because we were looking at 12 being a time when they're closing in on their adult size. So here we are going to look at again, another drug, in this case, Dilantin. And again, they're saying capsules, so this should be milligrams. It's to be given IM for a 5-month-old patient. So we have 5 divided by 150. And if the normal adult dose is 100 milligrams, this is 3.3 milligrams. Now, we rounded off in the previous problems. But rounding off a drug that is in this small amount gives us errors. As I was explaining to Ariel, as long as the dose that we can actually give is within 10% of what we calculate, we're fine giving that dose. if we round this off to 3, we are getting very, very close to 10%. And so we would actually not round this off. Okay. So again, we would set this up and look at this problem. The first one here, we have a 10-month-old patient, so 10 over 150 times 500. And ignore the, look at the result. If the result of rounding to the nearest whole number is not very much different, is not approaching 10%, round it off. If it is, don't round. That's a safety issue. The last thing we need is overdosing a baby. Okay, so be real careful when you do these calculations about rounding, and when you go through and do the calculations in this assignment, and then enter those into the quiz that accompanies it. Don't worry if you calculate something that I've told you to calculate, which is not to round off, and they grade you down because you did. I go through and look at every one of your answers and make sure that it's okay. Kayla, you saw that in the assignment last week when I went through and corrected the grading, and your grade went way up.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what I do. I look at this very, very carefully, and actually check your answers. And if you are technically correct by using exact numbers, you get it correct, as far as I'm concerned. Again, exact numbers are a reality. Okay. So keep that in mind when you're using these rules and when you're doing the quiz at the end. I can easily fix that. Let's now look at the most accurate means of calculating a proper dose for either adults or pediatric patients, which is body surface area. Now, we look at a formula for body surface area. Body surface area is always calculated in square meters. If you end up working in a cancer clinic, almost all cancer drugs are dosed based on body surface area. And there is a reason. Obviously, cancer drugs are all very toxic. You're killing cells. Well, the drug itself very rarely is so specific that it only kills cancer cells. So we try to give patients the lowest dose we can, the most appropriate dose we can for their disease. And all cancer drugs are developed in this manner. They're developed based on the body surface area of each patient. And we calculate what dose per square meter that we're going to give based on the dosing recommendations from the manufacturer and from the and approved by the FDA. So what we have, pardon? Oh, is that your baby?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Nope, no problem. I don't mind that. What we have is this complex looking problem. The body surface area in square meters is the height in centimeters times the weight in kilograms divided by 3,600, and then you take the square root of that entire formula. The square root symbol should actually go way down here because it's this entire formula, okay? And we'll go through, I'll show you a quick way of doing that. But first off, we need to be sure that we have the height in centimeters. Sometimes our patient height is in feet and inches. So we have to then convert inches. We have to go to inches and convert those to centimeters. And there are 2.54 centimeters to an inch. So we simply multiply, if the height is given in inches, we simply multiply by 2.54. And that becomes the number of centimeters. The weight in kilos, if our patients are weighed in pounds, which in this country they are, we divide that weight by 2.2 pounds per kilo. Okay, and that gives us the number of kilos. So let's take a look at this. We have a patient who's 155 centimeters tall and weighs 115 pounds. So what is their body surface area? Well, the first thing we need, we look at and we say, okay, this needs to be converted from pounds to kilos. So we divide 115 by 2.2. This formula we cross multiply, right? So this becomes 2.2x equals 115. Divide by 2.2, and we get 52.3 kilos. Keep the decimal. You know, when I do it on a calculator, I don't round off. In fact, anytime you're doing any of these calculations, don't round off till you get to the very end. Let your calculator put 30 decimal places if it wants. You don't care. So then we use this formula, 115 times 52.3 divided by 3,600, and we get 1.3. We can round the number off. 1.29 and 1.3 are close enough. Okay, so how do we do that? So I'm going to bring up my calculator, and I'll put that on screen in a minute. I'll put the calculator, I'll share the calculator. There we go. All right, so you can see the calculator, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the first thing we do is we calculate 115 pounds, excuse me. Divide that by 2.2 and we get 52.27, et cetera, all the way out to infinity, all right? Leave it there. Now we're going to multiply it by 155 centimeters. Oops. Okay, and then we're going to get this number. Again, it's a big number, but who cares? The calculator doesn't. Now we're going to divide that by 3,600 and get yet another number, 2.25, blah, blah, blah. And we want to take the square root. Well, in this particular, this is Microsoft's calculator in Windows. We have in the standard calculator, we have a square root function. This value is x, so if we simply click x squared, we get 1.5. Yeah, they didn't do this right. Oh, I thought they'd fixed this. No. No, actually, they did fix this. Your version should have the correct. This should be 155 times 52.3. This is the original. So this has been corrected on, this is the one critical thing that was corrected. So we get 1.5 square meters. And that is the correct answer because note here, they're multiplying 115 times, which was the pounds instead of the height, the weight instead of the height, times 52.3. So they're multiplying weight times weight. So anyway, this 155 centimeters, this should be 155. And by doing the calculation, by doing the square root, we now have the answer. So it's very quick on the calculator once you go ahead and do the calculations. Does that make sense to everyone?
Mhm.
Yes.
Kayla, does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So that method works, and you can always figure out these values. So let me go back to the assignment. As I said, this should be this should be 155 and this should be 1.5. So all we do is plug this in, convert 250 pounds to kilograms, and we have 190 centimeters. So we can, just plug that into the formula and calculate the BSA. Let me see. However, you may not, if you are in an office where you do a lot of this, you may have something called a nomogram. A nomogram is, we're going to keep on going. We're going to go down here to what we have for a nomogram. And there are two of them. One is an adult and the other is a pediatric chart. And what you do is you look at the patient, you calculate the weight, or the weight in kilos. So if we remember, the weight in kilos was, if you look here, we've got pounds and kilos on the same plot. So in this particular case, 110 pounds equals 50 kilos. If you divide 110 by 2.2, you'll get 50. So they've made it even easier. You don't have to do any conversions if you have this chart. They have the height in feet, okay, and in centimeters. So we were told that our patient was 155 centimeters, which is this point right here, which is 5 feet and 1 inch. If we look at the scale, 155 centimeters and weighs 115 pounds. So if we look over here, we can find 115, which is going to be midway between these, between 110 and 120. And if we simply draw a line through this to the height, it will go right through the 1.5 on them. Simply read it off the surface area. That's for an adult. Now, why did it do that? All right. Pediatric patients are a little different. Children grow differentially. I mean, if Ariel, you probably have had your child evaluated for normal growth. And Michaela, you would have seen, you can see this in if you ever get involved in a pediatric clinic, we evaluate our children for their normal growth. They look at weight and height. So if you have a child who is not of normal height for weight, we use this first body surface area, the one here on the right. If they are normal, and usually you'll see that in the problems, you'll be told that the child is normal height for weight. If it's not stated that they're normal height for weight, then assume that they are not. So if they are not normal, again, we use this surface area. If they are normal, we simply read again. We connect height, okay, in centimeters. In this case, they put centimeters on the left and inches on the right. And note that they go in inches, not feet and inches for the children. And we have pounds and kilos for the weight, so we can pick one or the other. if we're given the information in pounds, then we can just use that. And again, just take a ruler and draw a straight line. You may want to go ahead and print this page out, because you'll actually, I think, use it in either either the assessment or the assignment, maybe both, but you'll actually make use of this. So this is what we normally would use in an office setting rather than go through the calculations. We put you through the calculations so you can really get a feel for the relationship between weight and height and body surface area. And since people vary all over the map in terms of both. So here we have the last 5 problems on this use the nomogram. So here we have normal height. Okay. So an adult patient. So we have an adult. So you're going to use the adult chart. Okay. Pediatric patient. This one does not say that this patient is normal height. So assume not. Okay. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Kayla, are you okay with
Yeah,
that?
sorry, I keep saying yeah, but I don't think I speak loud enough.
Okay, yeah, that's all right. Maybe I just don't hear well enough.
Bless you.
So anyway, this you've got another a video that you can run for using the nomogram. I won't bore you with that, but I suggest you go ahead and look at it when you open up this assignment, because it will explain it maybe a little differently than I did. So we have these 2 ways. The formula is important to understand how we calculate this, because we're looking at what, again, a person, this 3,600, a person with 1 square meter of body area. Obviously, this multiplying height times weight would equal 3,600, because the square root of 1, because that would be 1, 3,600 divided by 3,600. The square root of 1 is 1. So that's, that is something that's been worked out at some phase, at some state. This all came out of the need to really adjust doses based on that. Okay. Questions?
No?
All right. So let's take, it's now 10 after 9, 9 after 10. So let's take a short break. I need to take a short break. So let's take a short break, maybe 10 minutes. And I'll pause the recording. Please remind me to start it again.
Okay.
One of my favorite tricks is to forget. So I'll pause this and I'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, I've resumed the recording.
Okay.
So let's look at what's going on this week. We have 2 discussions again, looking at, this one looks at adult and pediatric doses. So we're looking at these dosage related terms in the discussion. And again, this is looking at the formula, the basic formula for calculating a dose. If you look at this formula and this one and change get rid of these and just look at this as H over Q equals D over, we'll call it X, the amount to administer. If you algebraically rearrange that, then it turns into this formula right here. Okay. So these are the same formula, just in a different arrangement. Okay, so we've got a quick video showing this calculation, which you can look at. This drug, 500 milligrams ordered by the doctor, supplied as 250 milligrams per 5 ml. Now let's take a look at what these variables are. If we look at the dose on hand, or the dose ordered, is the 500 milligrams that we are told here. The dose on hand is this 250 milligrams. And the quantity on hand is 5 milliliters. So we use what's written on the label. Do not get smart and divide this and make it 50 milligrams per milliliter. Just use the numbers you're given. Every time you introduce a different calculation or a new calculation, you introduce another potential source of error. So never do more calculations than you must in any of these.
I think I've been doing that, like on our on the assessment or something. I forgot which one it was. I was breaking stuff down too much, and I got a lot of the questions wrong. So I don't know.
Yeah, that was on the assignment.
Yeah.
And I was really gonna look at that and look at your look at that and go through some of those from last week's assignment that were missed. So we can do that in a little bit, okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So in this particular one, there again are a lot of different videos and a lot of different documents that are worth reading. But what you're going to be doing is explaining where errors have come from. Okay, and how they're done and what the proper amounts should be. So look at what happens and look at this. Lauren is nearing the end of a long shift at an urgent care clinic. So this is potentially a place where she's been working a lot and working hard all day long, all shift long. So she's probably fatigued. When you're fatigued, that's when you have to be very, very careful. And when you're rushed, I mentioned this to Ariel earlier, when you are rushed, that's when you slow down to the extent that it's medically feasible. I mean, as I said, if you've got a patient who's bleeding out, you do something right now to stop it. But when we're talking about calculating a drug, then what we want to be sure of is that we take the time to do it properly. Fatigue and hurry are two of the major causes of error. And when you've been working long hours, that's when you slow down and and get very careful about what you're doing. So I've got a first response here that you can read when you're working on this particular discussion. Let's take a look at discussion 2. And here is where we're looking at calculating dosages for both adults and pediatric patients. Let me also make clear, we'll get into some of this at another time as well. There are many drugs, not by any means a majority of drugs, but there are many drugs that we dose based on the weight of the patient. When we are doing that, it is invariably based on the weight in kilograms. Drugs are developed in using the metric system. So when we have a weight-based dose, and you'll see these, you'll see a dose like 5 milligrams per kilogram. Well, that tells you what a 1 kilogram patient would get. A 1 kilogram patient weighs 2.2 pounds. That's an extreme preemie, right? So remember, when you are dosing by weight, you're going to be multiplying that dose per kilogram by the weight of the patient to calculate the actual dose for that patient. The same when you're dosing based on body surface area. We first calculate the body surface area and then multiply the recommended dose per square meter to be able to do that. So what we want to do is, if we look at, we calculate this body surface area, and we're looking at pediatric calculations. We still have to base this on an average adult dose, and for many patients. So again, the putative average adult body surface area is 1.7 square meters. So the formula for calculating a pediatric dosage based on body surface area is to calculate the body surface area and then divide that by 1.7 square meters and multiply that times the average adult dose. So in this particular case, it was calculated that we have, that we've been able to, this actually is a wrong statement. If we look at, the example should be that the body surface area of the child, we've looked this up on a nomogram chart. So we've calculated that's 0.4 square meters. This should be 0.4. I'll try and get that corrected. Later on this morning. The BSA is from this, looking at the nomogram, we've calculated the BSA is 0.4 square meters, not 1.7. We divide that 0.4 by 1.7 because the 1.7 is the average adult body surface area. Okay. So we calculate that ratio of the child to the adult is 0.23. So we multiply that by 250 to calculate the dose we're going to give to the child. Drugs that are developed based on body surface area, like cancer drugs, we would simply take we calculate the patient's body surface area and multiply that by the recommended dose per square meter. So if the dose per square meter is 50 milligrams per square meter, for an adult, an average adult, we'd multiply that by 1.7 if that was the body surface area of that adult. So we are going to be looking at those calculations. There are many drugs now. We've learned, I think, the hard way, that many drugs need to have some dosing information for pediatric patients. And the reason is that there have been a lot of errors in that. Plus, as I said at the beginning of the class, pediatric patients metabolize and deal with drugs differently as well. So now we're finding that many drugs have information from clinical trials based and for developing dosage recommendations for pediatric patients. And often it's going to be based on the weight of those patients. So we can have milligrams per kilogram or micrograms per kilogram for very potent drugs, or units. Units are a measure of some biologically derived products. Units, milligrams, micrograms, you don't care, because the answer you're going to get, generally speaking, is either a number of tablets or a number of milliliters to be given to the patient. So you don't care whether the potency units are milligrams, micrograms, units, milliequivalents. You don't care because they disappear. So again, we have another graphic down here, a little illustration down here of Clark's rule, Young's rule, and Freed's rule as well. And we've been through that before. So in this discussion, we're looking at accuracy. Body surface area is considered the most accurate measure of the relative size of patients because it takes into account both height and weight. Age rules whether that or weight rules only take into account one factor. And especially when we're dealing with weight, we know that that the size of any child is not based on just their weight, but it's based on weight and height. And so when we look, so the body surface area is in reality the most accurate measure of size differential between patients. That does not mean that these things are perfect, but they're pretty reasonable. Young's rule, Clark's rule. Young's rule is based on weight, or Clark's rule is based on weight, and Young's and Freed's on age. Again, looking at only age assumes that all children are uniform, which of course is simply not the case. Which is why we have, and that's why we have the normal height for weight versus not normal height for weight columns in the nomogram for pediatric patients, because they're not equivalent. However, in most cases, we can use any of these rules. When we are looking at extremely potent or toxic drugs, and obviously cancer drugs are that way, but there are other drugs that can be given that are very, very potent to pediatric patients. Children have the same diseases or have the potential to have the same diseases as adults. So children can be hypertensive. They can have metabolic diseases, just like adults do. And many of our drugs that are used to treat them are primarily developed in adults. A doctor can prescribe any drug for any disease that he feels will help the patient, and he can prescribe it in any amount. But we want to, but we don't just get real extreme about that and give toxic levels of any drug, but we can do that. So many drugs that have not been developed for use in children end up being used in children, which means that more and more we're seeing these recommendations for children dosing. But nonetheless, we have to have a way where we have no other information to do these calculations. So that's why we have these pediatric reductions. So we've got these videos here for weight-based calculations. These look to be possibly the same one. I'm not sure. But I think if you watch just one of these, you'll be fine. So again, we're going to look at this, and try to discuss this issue of accuracy in calculations and how we know we're selecting the right formula. Okay, if we're not told. So look at this in light of the things that we've been talking about and in light of the information, the background information and discussion. Make sure you read those carefully when you're doing this. And once again, I have already posted on that discussion. Questions, comments?
No.
No, seems pretty straightforward.
Great. So let's back up a little bit. Okay. So that is, let's take a look at some resources that I have put into this week. You should be able to see this. I have given you a PDF here of some prescription information. So let me call that up. And then share it. Now let's go through it. Okay, this is a PDF. This actually comes out, let's make this big enough to see. This actually comes out of the course text for COM 103, the pharmacy sequence that out of the old pharmacy sequence, the pharmacy software and databases. So it lists almost every abbreviation you might see in a prescription. So if you don't recognize something, look it up. I think we have just about everything here. Starts off with numbers because we see this. Now these numbers might be in Roman numerals. Remember, the Romans used letters to represent numbers. So the I, and the I could be capitalized or lowercase, means 1. 2 I's means 2. I means 3. But we get above 3 and we change the script. We use the abbreviation IV for 4 because we cannot have more than 3 of the same letter in a row in a Roman numeral. So because V is 5, and then the way the IV it reads is that we subtract the 1 from the 5. So 5 minus 1 is 4. So V is 5, X is 10, etc. VI would be 5 plus 1 equals 6. So you may want to just review those. But the important thing about Roman numerals on a prescription is that you will see something that might say I cap. That would mean 1 capsule. Or they might write it out in Arabic numerals. But you will see both. So when we see prescriptions written out, we generally like to see spaces in phrases. This one would be 1TPOQDHS. And it would read 1 tablet, T is a tablet, PO by mouth, QD per day, once per day, at hour of sleep. Okay, so that's, or at bedtime. So we generally don't run these things together, but it might look that way in the doctor's handwriting. Okay, if you're dealing with a written prescription. So all of these are there. There are more here than you are likely to see. There are some things that we don't like to see. We don't like using E to relate to I. That usually is supposed to be an O. However, you will see doctors do all sorts of crazy things with prescriptions. So if we go down a page, you'll find that there are a whole lot of these things that you'll see. Let's look at a couple that may be unfamiliar to you. Bolus. When you're giving an intravenous or intramuscular shot, we can poke the needle in and squeeze the entire contents into the patient. That's called a bolus. When it's standardly with intramuscular, subcutaneous, those routes, it's going to be a bolus shot. The other way is intravenous. Intravenous can be through time, over time. We call that an infusion. And generally speaking, we will look at some infusion calculations later in the course. I think next week we'll look at calculating infusion rates. Because an infusion is a steady amount over time to put drug into a patient. A bolus means we're going to stick a needle into the vein and put the entire contents in. So that's the difference here. C always by itself should mean with the exception of, you saw where we had, let's go back up to the top. We might see 1C meaning capsule. Again, this is not good abbreviation because C also means with. Comes from the Latin word cum, C-U-M, which means with. If we're going to talk about take one capsule, we should always write CAP at least, if not the full word capsule. So capsule, CAP is a capsule with food, can be either CC or CM. We should write these things out. Patients, and we should be able to interpret them for patients. So a lot of these things we will see. So I want you to have this list, and if you see an abbreviation that you don't understand, just look it up. This is a very useful one. They've left a few things out, which I've added. And one thing is the abbreviation for drop should be GTT. We have that there. We should never see just G because that doesn't tell us what they mean. But occasionally it does get used. So again, we are looking at the variations in the way people write out prescriptions. This particular table is again not complete. It's 5 pages, but it's not complete. The actual table is hundreds, if not thousands, of abbreviations long. And what we're seeing here with this kind of an abbreviation, I2G would mean instill 2 drops. That's why in hospital records, many hospitals have banned the use of any abbreviations because there are so many variants of abbreviations that there are mistakes made on a regular basis. So hospitals have learned the hard way to get rid of abbreviations in medical records. We should think very strongly about our use of abbreviations in the medical records when we are dealing with patients in a clinic even, because you don't want any confusion. Medical records are for two things. They're for recording what you have done or discussed with the patient, but they're also for the next person who sees the patient, who won't necessarily be you, nor will you necessarily remember when the patient comes back in 6 months what you told them. So you should should be very careful about using these things. But a lot of doctors and other prescribers are not very careful about these things. So read these, get familiar with them. You will need them as a medical assistant. Will you need every single one of them? I don't know. Chances are not, but you might see any of them. You don't know what the standards will be in any practice that you work in. So that's one that I've given you. Medical calculation document. I'm going to bring that up and share it. Okay. This is a document that I put together for another class, but I think you'll find it very useful resource to use. There are obviously some dosage calculations. There's a couple of references here to looking at these web pages on hospitals and so forth for looking at some of these abbreviations. This one I picked out of a learning module for nursing, but it's very useful for all of us. So we can look at doses. You may see dosing that is our recommended dosing is so much per drug in a day, and it might be divided into doses. And when it says divided into 4 doses, that means that you're going to give 1/4 of the total dose 4 times a day. Okay, so when you see the phrase in divided doses, your question is, how many doses is it divided into? Is it 2 times? Is it 3? Is it 4? Whatever. And each dose will be a fraction of an appropriate fraction of the amount of that will be given in each dose of the total, right? So if it's 6 times, if it's every 6 hours, that's 4 times a day. So the maximum dose for this particular drug, ampicillin, might be 1,000 milligrams per kilo per dose, okay? Which is 4,000 milligrams per kilo per day divided into 4 doses. So it would be a maximum of 1,000 milligrams per kilo. This is a whopping dose, but nonetheless, some of these drugs can be given in huge doses. This would probably be infused rather than given as a single dose. And as I say, we'll go through infusion calculations next week. So there is a lot of information in this. in this rather short document plus some plus these references. This came out of a British source. How can I tell? Because they use a British spelling for pediatric. Okay. Okay, so let's now go to another document that I uploaded. This is a general math review for doing pharmacy calculations, and I pulled this out of a course I used to teach in the previous program, the one that you guys aren't a part of, where we had several of these pharmacy math classes. So there's some basic information. This is where you can, sort of get yourself used to looking at Roman numerals again. For example, the use of Roman numerals, you see this 2 I's, GTT per day, 2 drops every day. Okay. For IV, we don't use the Roman numeral 4 because it can be confused with giving a dose via intravenous injection. This is not the best example, but however, unfortunately, again, you will see it. So ratio and proportion, we talked about that. Remember, a ratio is basically another way of writing a fraction, and a proportion is an equality of ratios or an equality of fractions. And it's the basis for our medical calculations. Temperature conversions. These days, we have all electronic thermometers, and they're adjustable Fahrenheit to centigrade. So you rarely are going to have to actually convert temperature, but the formulas are given here for doing that. Percentages are just a concentration. If we have 1%, you'll find certain drugs are going to be listed as 1% or 0.5% or something like that. What that means is the number of grams of drug per 100 grams of total amount. So basically, it's a concentration. Many of these things would be 1%. Mostly, we are looking at liquids. We're talking about milligram or grams per liter, or grams per 100 milliliters, rather, as in terms of percent. Remember, a percent is parts per 100. So if you have something that is a 1% drug, 1 gram per 100 milliliters. So in that case, the dose on hand, DH, would be 1 gram, and the Q, the volume, would be 100 milliliters. So you can just read these directly. You don't need to right now worry about the section on allegation. This is background information for you. We have some pediatric calculations as well, and we'll get to the IV math next week. So I wanted you to have this particular document so you could see some more information about the math that's used for these kinds of medicinal calculations. Let's go back to, okay. Back up to here. So basically, that's where we are sitting right now with this week. I don't, it's now almost 11. So what I'm going to suggest is that for the rest of this morning, since I've been talking for about 2 hours, that you start working on your assignment. And Kayla, do you want to go back to last week's assignment and look at the problems that you had problems with?
I think I just need to not make it so like I need to not just think that hard. Like I need to just put down the number that it is, you know what I mean? Like I'm like, okay, so if it's this, then I have to do this, and I'm gonna do this, and then I'm like stressing myself out, you know, but like I think it's just like I need to put the actual number down, you know what I mean, and not convert it into things.
Yeah. I would agree. So you're okay with what I gave you the feedback for last week's assignment?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Please don't make these harder than they are.
Okay.
It's real easy to do. We all tend to make these things harder than they actually turn out to be. So I would just would really suggest you avoid doing that as much as possible. Okay. Well, then what I suggest, since it's now 11, let's take a second break. We're supposed to take our breaks at 10 and 11. Let's take our second break, and then you guys come back and work on either looking at the discussions, or actually I suggest getting started on the assignments so that you can ask questions. Because I will be here. I'll probably put myself on mute because you know, to not have any extraneous sounds coming through. But if you have questions, just ask. Give me a few seconds to get back on, and I'll be happy to answer them. Okay?
Okay.
So take a break and come back in about 10 minutes and get started.
Sounds good.
Okay, great.
Remember how we discussed when you have like 0.7 milligrams and then what they have on hand is in micrograms, and we have to obviously go from milligrams to micrograms to make them match,
Yes.
make them equivalent. When you're moving that decimal, it's 3 times, correct? Just for, unless you're going to a smaller or bigger size, larger than, I don't know how to word it, I'm sorry, but
Yeah. And when you're, the nice thing about medical metrics, metric system is that each step, gram to milligram and milligram to microgram are 1,000. So in each step, you move the decimal point 3 places.
okay. Perfect. Thank you for answering that. I just wanted to make sure I was doing that correctly,
Yes.
at least.
That's right. And you know, if you ever doubt yourself, just pull out a calculator. You know, you'll always have calculators available to you when you're working. So if you ever feel like maybe I'm not doing this right, pull out a calculator.
Perfect.
Okay?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I left my charger at my friend's house, and my computer is about to die.
I think if you, isn't there an app you can download for Zoom?
Yes, there is, but you have to make sure that when you download it, you use, you know, make sure that you use the CEHE app, I think. You can also do, as you know, you can also do Canvas on your phone, but there you have to make sure that you get the right Canvas.
Yeah, I was trying to sign into the Canvas, but do you know the school URL thing?
Let me take a quick look here.
I just don't know how to find that.
Yeah. Yeah, the course is https://cehe.instructure.com.
Oh no, I mean like oh shoot. So I have the Canvas one, but
Yeah.
it's asking what my school name is.
Oh, yeah, look for, I think you want the Center for Excellence in Higher Education, CEHE. College America might work, but I don't know how that's set.
Sorry. So the Center for Excellence in Higher Education, would that be for my online classes as well?
Yep,
Okay, cool. Thank you.
you're welcome.
And my computer might die like here soon. So like
Right,
I'm gonna try to zoom in on my phone.
okay. Make sure you do your daily checkpoint
Okay.
if you haven't already done it.
I knew that I was forgetting something. I like
Yeah.
woke up. Sorry. I woke up and it was Monday and I was like, I have nothing to do today.
Ah,
And I was
well,
like, wait. I was like, I do. I don't have school on Tuesdays. It's Mondays now. I'm like, you're messing up, Michaela.
well, yeah, reminder to yourself on Sunday that you have class on Monday. So,
Yeah, I think now, like, I'm used to it. I think it's just because last week we didn't do Monday, we did Wednesday.
yeah, that's right. That's always a pain.
Yeah, I usually.
A
Okay,
with like the squared root, basically the surface area formula.
right.
So when we're calculating that and it gives us like 1.55 and a bunch of other numbers, do we need to just round to the nearest, would that be 10th right after the decimal?
After, yeah, I would go to the, after you do the square root, you mean?
Yes, like when you calculate after you've converted pounds to kilograms and then did the height times the kilograms divided by 3,600 and you get that equals.
Right. Then you take the square root. Yeah, round that off to 1. That's what they're requesting. In the clinical setting, you probably round it to 2 for more accurate dosing.
Okay, so like 1.55 would be like 1.56 then?
No, it'd be like 1.6.
1.6,
We're
okay.
rounding just to 1 decimal place.
Oh, just to 1 decimal place, okay.
As
okay.
they instruct you here. As I say, clinically, I probably would always go to 2, but they're just saying 1 here.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to clarify because I know sometimes they don't specifically ask that in the problem itself. So I
Right.
just want to make sure that I'm doing it correctly.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay,
You are. Okay.
great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And
Okay.
so you know how they have like the dash for 2.0 and then another one for 2.1 and then they have like 4 in between? What are those? What would that be considered? Because you want to be exact with body surface area, don't you?
Right, let's pull that up.
Okay. So I didn't see like a key. I know, Bubba.
So
I've
you're
never
looking at
used.
this?
I'm sorry.
So you're looking at this?
Yes, sir. Yes.
As in body surface area, it says 1.2. So this divides it. This would be 1.22, 24, 26, 28, and 30.
Perfect. That's what I was thinking, but I wasn't sure. I've never used one of these before, so I wanted to make sure of that.
Yeah, when I actually, interestingly enough, I showed this to Nate, and he'd never seen one before either.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I've seen certain charts for pediatric just because of having my son. So I've kind of seen something that resembles the pediatric one, but I've never seen one for an adult before.
Right.
So,
Well, yeah, cancer clinics will use these.
okay.
So, because so many of their drugs are prescribed by body surface area.
Perfect. Well, thank you for explaining that.
You're quite welcome.
So when on the pediatric chart right there, so when they're specifying that a child is of normal height, or it doesn't give the height, but it gives like the weight, you would still use that
Yes.
portion of the chart, correct?
Yes, you would.
Okay, so then you get the, so if they're, for example, 30, let me see, they're 30 pounds, do you start there on the, for children of normal height for weight at the 30 and then go like a straight across?
Yeah,
Or-
straight across, and then where you know, so connect that to the height, and then just read where it crosses this the proper vertical column for surface area. This is the surface area for children of normal height to weight. So if they're normal, you connect the two, the weight and the height, and read off of this the right hand surface area column. This one here.
Okay, so, oh, I see what you're saying now. So you look for that 30 on the height on that.
Yep.
Height right there.
Yeah, look for the height, whatever the height in either
Weight are.
centimeters or inches, doesn't matter.
Okay. Okay, that makes more sense. And you read off the surface area for the normal.
Right, read off the surface area for the normal.
And that would be, is that column right there next to it? Yes. Okay. I think I understand.
Well, as usual, if you need to, if you have other questions, you can email me.
Okay, perfect.
So it's now just about time to close class. So let's just go back and take a quick look at here. Okay, so we'll do the in-class activity on Wednesday.
Okay.
And once again, I'll post the key afterwards. So you're working on the assignment now. That's great. I would put off doing the assessment until after we do the in-class activity.
Okay, I can do that. That's fine. I'll focus on the discussions
Right.
in the week 2 assignment.
Okay. And so, and you know, you've been doing good at keeping up with your daily checkpoints, so keep that up.
Okay.
Unless you have any other questions, I'm ready to cut this off for the day, and we'll see you on Wednesday.
Sounds great, Mike. I think I'm pretty set to go.
Okay, great. We'll have a good couple of days, and I'll talk to you Wednesday morning.
Sounds good, Mike. You as well.
Thank you very much.